Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is Monday, January 22nd, 2013, and I'm Darko. I'm going to cover the War on Terror, Liberty, Sovereignty, including Syria, Mali, Israel, with the elections I just had, Afghanistan, and hopefully I can cover all kinds of news today. I have a bunch, but I probably will have to just continue tomorrow. The first one I have up is Assad's overthrow, a red line for Iran, says a supreme leader's aide. So a senior aide to Iran's supreme leader warned that the overthrow of Syria's president, it says his fate was a red line in one of the Islamic State's strongest messages to support for the Damascus government. Not a very big surprise that they support them. But it says if the Syrian president is toppled, the line of resistance, they're talking about Israeli Zionist resistance, in the face of Israel will be broken. We believe that there should be reforms emanating from the will of the Syrian people, but without resorting to violence and obtaining assistance from the United States of America. You remember this article just from, a week ago, January 16th, Assad orders army to hit Israel and Egypt if he is killed. So this is a claim that he ordered the Syrian army generals in a secret meeting to bomb Israel and Egypt if he is killed, Israeli online newspaper has reported. From the 20th of January, Syrian opposition and backers to meet in Paris. The Syrian opposition leaders will meet in Paris this month, French foreign minister said on Sunday, decrying an abominable situation in which he said 100 people a day were being killed in an uprising against Assad. So it says here the situation is horrific and Bashar must go as fast as possible. So I don't need to go over all this stuff that's happening. I'll just say that the West thrives off these people dying and suffering, refugees starving in the winter, the cold dead of winter, to put pressure on Assad to basically step down, voluntarily step down, and so they can, the Western forces can put in their own little puppet government there that is pro-Israel, which would be a big change. So they'll put as much pressure and go lower the bar as far as they possibly can. Ethically, in order to get this regime change, again, according to Brookings Institute policy for regime change. Then we have Odor Paris. So they were meeting in Paris for a big meeting. The rebels, the terrorists, the Western terrorists, and it says a gaseous stench fills the French capital. So maybe that's because of this big meeting with all these important people fighting for humanitarianism. A far cry from the smell of freshly baked croissants and coffee. Parisians were greeted with a chemical stink from a gas leak on Tuesday morning. Citizens of Paris reported headaches and nausea as a non-toxic pong wafted through the streets. We have Syrian rebels failed to agree on Exile government. The divisions remain in Islamist-dominated umbrella groups. So the virtual takeover by the Islamists of the Syrian National Coalition at its meeting last month was expected to end the divisions in the rebel lobbying group. So it says here, the divisions, however, seem to be remained and even grow in a new meeting. It says that this is despite Islamists holding a large number of seats in the 70-member group that belong to different factions. And today's efforts to form a government in exile, rule rebel seized lands has failed. And here's an important thing. Deals were so remote that the Syrian National Council president left in mid-conference to go fundraising in Qatar, and several of the key factions didn't even nominate anybody for the position of the prime minister in exile. This is followed by Egypt's foreign reserves rise after Qatar deposit. So they're the big funder there, Qatar, the big money funder. Egypt's foreign reserves have risen to $15 billion, held by a deposit by Qatar to help support the economy. I remember Egypt just took big, huge loans from the IMF. Recently. I think another country as well. And what I basically refer to as a foreign invasion of a sovereign nation, they call it a humanitarian Syrian crisis. The mainstream media and the Western powers. A suicide bomb kills dozens in Hama province. They're actually admitting this for the first time. Usually they'll just take the rebels' word that it was government forces bombing their own buildings and stuff like that and their own people. But it's kind of hard to believe after you come up with such blatant lies. But it says a suicide bomber targeting Syrian pro-government forces has killed many people in the central province, including civilians, of course, right? But this is an act of desperation with these suicide bombs. This is now a regular thing. I've been covering Syria for probably since the beginning of it. And now this is the most suicide bombings I've seen in a row consecutively. So, like I said, this is an act of desperation, really, which means that these guys are actually winning. Syrian army pounds militant positions in Damascus province. So they hit the positions in several areas in Damascus province as part of a campaign against the foreign-backed militants operating in the country. There's also been reports of a power outage that was in mainstream media as well. And that's, of course, the terrorists attacking their power stations. The situation in the Yarmouk camp, where the armed men have flocked, is still tense, and clashes between Palestinian popular committees and armed groups have continued. That's right, they keep attacking these Yarmouk camps, the terrorists are, and they're trying to fuel unrest in there as well. Moscow sends 2 planes to pick up Russians hit by Syrian war. We've heard reports about Assad being on a Russian ship. Don't know if that's true, but now I've heard reports of this, but this has come from RT, so who knows, right? Maybe it's true. Moscow sending 2 planes to pick up Russians hit by Syrian war, along with the Syrians that fled to Lebanon, or Russians that fled to Lebanon out of Syria. Anti-Patriot protesters gather in front of German embassy in Ankara. So, it says Turkish protesters have rallied in the capital, Ankara, to protest against the deployment of NATO Patriot missiles along their country's border with Syria. Demonstration urged Parliament on Tuesday to take action and cancel the deployment of the NATO missiles and troops in Turkey. So they have arrived. They just arrived recently, and they'll be manned by German and Dutch troops. But it is crazy because Germany is basically a Zionist-occupied government or country. So when you see stuff like this, it just kind of makes me laugh because if you ask me personally, I think the Nazis were probably angels compared to these people today. So. I mean, what happened to Stalin? It's weird how the hammer and sickle and Stalinism and all that got basically buried in history. So this is the only thing we know of is Nazi Germany. France looking for total reconquest of Mali. Goes on here, says France will accept nothing less than total reconquest of Mali. That's a pretty big quote there coming from the defense minister. He says his forces will not leave any pockets of resistance. Merkel of Germany says Mali mission protects Europe and sends transport planes. She said that the security in North Africa is also Europe's security after her government offered 2 transport aircraft to assist the military operation combating insurgents in Mali. Says these transport planes will fly African troops from the Economic Community of Western African States to the Malian capital as French ground forces start operations to repel insurgents controlling northern Mali. You have the UK. Britain said on Monday it would consider giving more help to French forces fighting Islamist militants in Mali, but would not take a combative role in the mission. Then you have Prime Minister of Libya says Libya will not be based for attacking neighbors. Yeah, right. I don't know if you have much say in what happens. You're just another puppet government. So we have U.S. I mean, they've been smuggling weapons through there, in there, out of there. So. You have U.S. begins transporting French troops to Mali. It says here that American planes transported French troops and equipment to Mali, they said on Tuesday. Then we have this, of Pentagon's hand behind French intervention in Mali. So we're hearing about that and about Canada. It says here, as French soldiers pour into Mali in the fight to push back advancing Islamist militants, questions have been raised as motives behind the intervention. It goes on here, an author told RT the U.S. was using France as a scapegoat to save face at any time when France and the rest of the Eurozone are trying to weather the economic crisis. What's Paris seeking to gain by getting involved in another conflict? Says it's another follow-up to the French role and other destabilizations that we've seen, especially in Libya last year with toppling of Gaddafi. In a sense, this is a French neo-colonization in action. But behind it is a very strong hand of the U.S. Pentagon, which has been preparing the partitioning of Mali. Then you have this, are Westerners pulling the strings? Yeah, actually, the original article in Yahoo and all that was inside job. It's an inside job. I'm like, what the hell? And I couldn't really understand the article. But what they're saying is what English-speaking jihadist seen in Mali as a Canadian is reported to have coordinated Algeria attack. So Canada is investigating an allegation by the Algerian Prime Minister that one of its citizens, Canadian citizen, coordinated the terror raid at the Saharan gas plant in which dozens of hostages were killed. Westerners, including a man with blonde hair and blue eyes, are believed to have been among the Islamist militants who launched last week's attack on the complex. I think it's BP. Next up, we have various U.S. intelligence services help French in Mali. In this case, between the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which you don't hear much of, Intelligence Agency of the U.S. Defense, and the Directorate of Military Intelligence, France, and the American CIA and the sprawling NSA on one hand, and the General Directorate for External Security and Central Directorate of Internal Intelligence on the other. So it says exchange of information of the Franco-American Mali have increased the beginning of the occupation of the north of the country by armed Islamist groups, said the Eric Denens, director of French Center for Research on Intelligence. Since the establishment in 2008 of the U.S. Military Command for Africa, AFRICOM, continues as specialist, the Americans have deployed some 5,000 troops, drones, reconnaissance aircraft, and listening stations throughout Africa. Remember, 35 countries in Africa are going to, at least that's what their articles were saying. The U.S. were going to be sending troops to over 35 countries. And you can check it out. Links will be posted in YouTube's video description. This is a pretty decent article. You should go check it out, but I'm going to keep moving for time's sake. Just go through it briefly. Algeria's brutal DRS intelligence agency, the nation's real power. So the abductions of workers at the Saharan gas complex in Algeria by Islamic militants, says here, has placed a harsh glare on the country that typically avoids international media spotlight. So Algeria, a vast, sparsely populated, natural resource-rich nation in northern Africa that gained independence from France, yeah, supposedly, right, 50 years ago, largely avoided the turmoil of the Arab Spring Revolution that toppled neighboring governments in Tunisia and Libya. Pretty interesting, though. It's worth noting that most of these governments have, these intelligence agencies that aren't actually loyal to the people. They're usually globalized, and they're all interconnected, whether they're Mossad or the ISI or the CIA. And in turn, the militaries work along with the intelligence or for the intelligence. And of course, you have the elites or the oligarchs, the financial elites that basically run things. And when things get bad, they take over. You start to see who actually runs the country. It's ruled by the National Liberation Front. Since the country's violent birth in '62, Algerian domestic and foreign policy has actually been dictated by the government's super-secret state intelligence agency. It's been led by one man, this General Medine, who's actually been leading for the last 23 years. So Algeria said that army rescues hostages in the toll unclear. So it says Algeria declares operation to free hostages, and what they actually did was they killed most of the hostages. Pretty gory stuff. But then we come across this article: hostages were human shields in Algeria. The Islamic militants used foreign hostages as human shields to stop Algerian troops aboard helicopters from strafing them with gunfire. And that was a Filipino survivor of the 4-day bloodbath recounted on Monday. Whenever government troops tried to use a helicopter to shoot at the enemy, we were used as human shields. We were told to raise our hands. The government forces could not shoot at them as long as we were held hostage. Another article from 21st Century Wire from the 20th of January, U.S. AFRICOM underway with Mali as predicted. So as predicted this week, the upheaval in Mali was merely a nudging exercise to move forward the state objectives laid down in the U.S. AFRICOM policy directives with no debate or questioning in foreign policy circles, as the Obama coronation and ceremonial pop concert in Washington, D.C., keeping American eyes and ears glued to the corporate media. NATO allies, led by the U.S., are carefully carving out a comprehensive military footprint in Africa in order to further evict Chinese influence in the continent, or from the continent. The main excuse in the short term will be to stop the spread of Islamic extremists, but as history has witnessed, this is merely a superficial justification for a military and economic colonization of the reign over the next 2 decades. Ironic that it would be America's first black president who would preside over the takeover of Africa. It says expect more U.S. bases to come in the near future, as well as more violent civil wars propping up regularly in the region. And Algeria BP siege, militants trained in jihadi camps in Libya. Look at that. Algerian military sources say terrorists who attacked the gas complex trained over in the Libyan border. So I'm sure there's intelligence agencies from the West that are funneling these weapons to terrorists, and who are training them in Libya as well, and then unleashing them. Yeah, one of the first things that happened when the terrorists and foreigners came into Libya and co-opted that, quote, protest, was basically staged by the West. The first thing that they did was they freed all the terrorists that Gaddafi had locked up. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.